Hey, I'm Christopher, and I'm going to show you how I made this miter sled to give you perfect 45-degree cuts.
I started off by cutting down some 1/2-inch plywood to use as the base for the jig. I don't have a fancy track saw or anything, but you can easily make your own track for any circular saw just using a piece of 1/4-inch plywood attached to the top of a piece of 3/4-inch plywood and running your saw along it like I did here. Now I chose the dimensions of 28 inches by 15 inches for my base. I chose that size because it works well for my table saw and I don't actually have to adjust the fence or take it off or anything like that in order to accommodate that size base. I went ahead and glued 2 sheets of the same size of this 1/2-inch plywood together to make sure that it was a nice and thick, sturdy base so that it wouldn't warp over time. A single sheet of 1/2-inch plywood would probably be fine, but at the end of the day, I'm an engineer and over-engineering things is what I do. I used a speed square in the T-track channels in the top of the table to make sure that the base of the jig would be perfectly lined up to get a 45-degree cut from the blade. Once I had it lined up like I wanted, I went ahead and held it down with a large weight and I checked, and I rechecked to make sure that this was perfectly square and would get a 45-degree cut. If this is messed up, everything else was going to be messed up. I then positioned my guides and marked them so that I knew where I could drill holes to anchor these to the bottom of the platform. I used sandpaper to rough up the area of the slides that would make contact with the platform, and then I applied some CA glue or super glue to hold them in place before I screwed them on. I like using these polymer slides for my jigs because they slide super easy in the tracks. However, whenever you're going to put screws in, you got to be really careful because if you over tighten these screws, it'll actually bulge that plastic and they won't slide smooth.
Yes!
Sometimes it's the little wins that mean the most. Now it was time to make a cut into the base. For my jig, this cut length was about 9 to 10 inches long, but that cut length is going to vary from jig to jig depending on what actually you're wanting out of it. For me, I wanted a gap between the ruler and the edge of the platform to be about 3.5 to 4 inches long, so a cut of about 9 to 10 inches on this 45-degree would give me that space. If you're planning on cutting 6-inch wide boards and you need more space than that, then obviously your cut length will have to be a little longer. To cut the aluminum ruler, you can use just about any woodworking blade. Since the aluminum's so soft, it normally doesn't have an issue cutting through it. That said, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I actually had an issue with the blade actually lifting up the aluminum the first time I did this cut. Just be smart, be safe, use a clamp and everything will be fine. Now, when you cut this ruler, you want to be very deliberate with how you cut it. It's not the easiest thing to explain, so I've made this diagram to try to show you what I'm talking about. You want to cut the ruler like this, not like this. If you cut it like this, you're actually cutting off part of the side of the ruler that you're going to be using to measure. Whereas if you cut it like this, you still have that full side for an accurate measure. So once again, cut it like this, not like this. So with this miter sled, you'll be able to cut any board with perfect 45-degree angles at the length you want on the shorter side between the 45s by using the ruler. However, I wanted to make sure that I was also going to be able to use this sled to cut picture frames. And since picture frames are measured by the size of the rabbet that actually holds the picture and the glass in, I needed to be able to make sure that that ruler would be able to accommodate measuring the rabbet size. Since the shallowest rabbet I would ever make would be 3/8 of an inch, I went ahead and cut a board that would elevate the surface of the ruler to 3/8 of an inch above the surface of the jig. If this doesn't make sense right now, just bear with me, it should make sense in a few seconds. For this next piece, it's crucial that it's at a 90-degree angle with the outside of the ruler, the measuring side. Once I knew it was square, I went ahead and put a line down so I knew exactly where to put it back. I also pulled it about 1/16 of an inch away from where the blade would be before I marked it to know where to cut it to length. Sorry for the workpiece not staying square in the camera frame throughout this clip, but basically I'm just gluing and screwing it down while making sure it stays perfectly square with that ruler. One other thing I want to point out that I forgot to do here is that top point of that 45-degree angle should actually be cut off by about an inch. I caught this later after it was already screwed down, so avoid the hassle and go ahead and trim it yourself before you actually screw it down. The last thing I wanted to do was make a stop block to get repeatable cuts. My original design was going to use a T-track laid in front of the ruler and then have a stop block that would slide along that. But then I saw how David Picciuto over at Make Something did his, and I really liked that idea and it was a lot easier. Basically, you just cut a 45-degree angle into a scrap piece of wood, and then a groove will be cut into that piece of wood that rides along the edge of the ruler. And then just mount a toggle clamp to the top of that block that can clamp down to the ruler, and you can slide it and clamp it as you need. It was right here that I discovered I needed to cut the point off that little board. So like I said, just save yourself this hassle and cut it off before you anchor it down.